Hello, my name is Russ Selkin. I'm with Butte County Office of Education in the K-12 High-Speed Network.
My name is Rachel White, also with Butte County Office of Education and the K-12 High-Speed Network.
What we're going to do today is this is the last webinar we have before the close of the window for the 2014-15 application cycle. It closes on February 26th at 8:59 p.m. So the purpose of today's webinar is for us to go through the bidding process and reminders on the Form 470. Then we'll stop and take any questions, and then we'll finish up with the 471 and the steps for doing that. So that's kind of an outline. Again, this is the last webinar before the 470 window closes, but we'll have plenty of opportunity for you to ask any questions. And there'll be some slides that I'll go through quickly. We just wanted to make the deck inclusive, just to make sure you had the information for reference. But if you need more details and this is maybe a new year of E-rate, you've never done it before, we do have all of our previous fall trainings archived in webinars on the K-12 HSN website under E-rate and under training materials. So the first thing on slide 2, what is the role of the Department of Ed K-12 HSN in the state libraries? We strictly are just the best practices and kind of a general guiding. There's a focus group of ourselves, so it's a few consultants, Jared Keller from the state libraries, myself, Doris from the Department of Ed, and Joe, and also Rachel. And our goal is to take best practices and people's from the focus group's experiences over the last number of years as well as this year, and help condense that down into some information that should be helpful, as well as walk you through the process in general terms. So also just a reminder that this is an FCC, a federal program administered through USAC, so therefore we have no jurisdiction over the program or the rules or the funding of it. It's just more, we're just trying to help guide you through a federal E-rate program, which is for telecommunications and internal connections. Again, reminder that I talked about just a second ago, the 471 window, the second step of the process in the filing year, was open on January 14th and closes on March 26th. Last possible day again to file 470 is February 26th. And one of the themes we want to emphasize is that if you haven't filed the Form 470, please do right away, because we anticipate with the challenge of the new 471 system, we're going to go online and show you later, that there'll be delays and slowness in the system, and waiting until the last 2 or 3 days could prove to be problematic for you, including your application on time. Bidding process, slide 4, now on slide 5. So remember, the 470 starts the bidding process, identifies the number of eligible entities receiving it, identifies products and services just seeking bids, and may include an RFP if one is being used, includes required certification of program compliance, and that's the last page of the Form 470. Again, a rule of thumb on slide 6 is to wait at least 28 days. We usually say 29 days just to ensure that you haven't miscalculated. It also says it at the top of the Form 470 allowable contract. So that's another way to check it too. But ensure bidding process is fair and open. You don't want to provide insider information, including define disqualifying factors or special requirements if you have a matrix at the end that you're going to be identifying the selected vendors with in terms of your selection. Price, of course, always is the highest weight. So we have past trainings provided that matrix to help you out with that. But the one thing that we also, as a reminder here, as we end the 470 window and go into the 471, is to ensure that your 470 has been certified. And that's something that we showed on last prior trainings. So on slide 7, in general, California state laws are more restrictive than the FCC rules in some cases in terms of procurement and bidding. There is some exceptions that occur when the FCC rules will prevail. A way to look at this in general terms is that there's a stacking. You have the federal rules, the state procurement code, and then the final is your district rules. And whichever is the most restrictive is the bidding or procurement rule that you must follow. So here we're on slide 7. Just some outline of state and federal rules.
So Russ, I'm looking at this slide. At what point would I have to actually go out to like a formal RFP process?
Good question. As you can see here, the procurement under bid threshold for California is anything less than $86,000 does not require a formal competitive bidding. But there is, one of the other slides refers to this, but there is kind of a nuance to that. So sometimes, especially when you're doing Category 1, there's a lot of locations, and you may be under the bid requirement, but you want to specify maybe what they call A and Z locations, as well as the speeds. If you were to send that out later into a Word document, that could be, in terms of the FCC rules, looked at as being a formal RFP. So that's when you would need to check the box. But in general, you wouldn't need to go out to bid if you're like in Category 2 in terms of less than $86,000. But the FCC, if you hand out anything, would require you to check the box of RFP.
So then, just so I'm clear, an RFP, as far as the FCC is concerned, can be anything that's in addition to the Form 470. Is that right?
Yep, you're exactly correct.
Okay. So what if my district has standardized on like Cisco or HP? How can I get E-rate to help discount services there?
That's a very good question, and I know that myself and others at SAC trainings that they've had every year in California asking that question, because in the industry and also in K-12, you standardize on your technologies to help manage your costs. So one of the questions that we've asked is, what if we have a particular standard? The FCC rules still requires or equivalent. So for example, let's say you standardize on some kind of manufacturer, whether it be HP or Cisco, in a particular model, and you put the model number on your Form 470, or in the case, for example, we just said there was an external Word document or website, and you checked RFP, then you would have to put the language that would make it really clear that, or equivalent, so that the vendor knows that they can quote what you've asked for with a specific manufacturer or an equivalent. You can also add some additional language that is onus upon the vendor providing that quote that it's interoperable with the existing. So, Rachel, I have a question for you. In advertising in the newspaper twice in a 2-week period, how does that work, and when do I have to do that?
That's a very good question. That kind of relates back up to the very first rule that's stated here on the state side. When your bidding threshold is going to exceed the $86,000 mark, at that point you have to do what's called the formal bidding process according to California standard. And you would want to advertise in the newspaper in the legal notice section twice in a 2-week period that you are conducting a formal bidding process. Now, that's not to be confused with the E-rate bidding side of things. You still have to post that Form 470, and your bidding window has to remain open for a minimum of 28 days. But that's where you blend the two different rules, the California rule of requiring that newspaper posting and the E-rate rule of requiring that Form 470 posting.
Does it matter which newspaper I put it in?
Well, it does and it doesn't. It does because you want to advertise in an area close to where you are, so that you can get vendors in your area to respond. But let's say you're in an area where it's a very small rural location. You don't want to just advertise in your own local area knowing that nobody's really going to respond to that. But perhaps in the largest town near you, you use that town's newspaper or that city's newspaper.
And also too, I think, isn't it that the advertisement goes if you're exceeding 86,000 as well as if it's cabling like for public works, correct?
That's correct. So when it comes to public works projects where you're actually cutting into your facility, the threshold doesn't, that limitation doesn't apply. It's just simply public works and requires a formal bidding process. So at this point, we've completed our bidding process, and now it comes time to selecting your service provider. Now remember, E-rate is looking for you to get the most cost-effective solution. So that's why they have you use a bid evaluation matrix. It helps you come to the conclusion of what is the most cost-effective. So in that matrix, price is the heaviest weighted factor, but you can also include other options in there, and we'll show you what an evaluation matrix looks like in a couple more slides. So just keep in mind, if you end up choosing a solution that may not be the most inexpensive, you just need to be prepared to explain why you did not choose the most inexpensive. It doesn't make it wrong. It just means that you need to be prepared to explain it. And that's where having a good bid evaluation matrix comes in handy. It allows you to document the process and document all the notes that go along in that evaluation process so that you can show why you chose a specific provider over another. Now, it's also during this process that you can feel free to reach out to the service provider so that you can understand what they're offering to you. It'll make it easier for you in the long run if you really truly understand what services you're looking at. The last note on here states that the service provider is responsible for providing the lowest corresponding price. which that automatically brings up the question, what is the lowest corresponding price, also called LCP? It relates only to your Category 1 services, and it's a requirement for service providers that they give you the lowest price that they offer to other similarly situated commercial customers. So that means it's based on where you're at. Are you a mountain community or rural community in the city? What are other people in your same area paying for that same service on a commercial level? Now, the responsibility does rest with the service provider to give you the lowest corresponding price, but don't feel at all like you can't ask them to confirm, are you providing us LCP pricing? So, Russ, what happens if you don't receive any bids?
That's a good question. That K-12 pricing and everything, we have gone out to bid, and you need to wait, of course, the 28 days or 29 days. At that point, if you receive no bids, then you need to go out equally and objectively, I guess transparently reach out to telecom providers and ask them if they can provide you a bid. A lot of times that, especially in an area, I know in my part of California, there's only one service provider. The account teams just get busy, they forget about it. Human nature, things can slip through the cracks. So you reach out to all of the vendors, and then hopefully you receive a quote back. But document this communication so that you can prove under an audit that it was fair and open and objective.
So if we end up posting a second Form 470, does our 28 days start all over again?
Yes, unfortunately it would. This time of year, it would be pretty much very challenging to do another Form 470, but you do still have time like we talked about at the beginning. So if you forgot something and you need to add something in, then you do have time to do another Form 470, you'd have to. So one thing too is that, just as an added note, if you do reach out, again, like I document it, make sure you send yourself an email. USAC has said that, as well as you'll have a copy of the emails that you've sent out to the carriers that are particularly could provide that service.
We're getting notified that our sound is cutting in and out. Should we go back to the phone bridge?
Yeah, we can do that. Maybe if we hold it a little closer here, see if that helps out. So if we go on to the next slide, slide 11, and I know in this particular case, if you only received one bid, document this fact. And again, it's kind of similar when you receive no bids. You want to make sure that you have something, you send an email to yourself to notify that it's been something that has taken place, that you only received one bid. And FCC expects applicants to demonstrate cost effectiveness even if there's only one bid received. And so what they're getting at that is if for some reason you did receive one bid, and it was very high in nature. I know that there's been some examples where a single location of the school receiving a $9 million special construction. That would be an example of a high cost and maybe wouldn't be looked at as the most cost effectiveness, especially if you hadn't gone out and reached out to other vendors to see if they could provide adequate or similar services for you.
So as stated on slide 12, we talked a little bit about the bid evaluation and how it has to have the price as the heaviest weighted factor. But there are other examples that we can take a look at as well. For example, prior experience, personal qualifications, and cost of ineligible components and services. At this point, we're going to pause our presentation for a moment so we can dial in on the phone bridge and perhaps get better sound quality for you. We're now back on slide 12, and hopefully our sound quality has improved a little bit. Now moving on to slide 13, where we talk about the sample bid evaluation matrix. We've highlighted this slide before, showing that price is the heaviest weighted factor, and we see which vendors at the top, which ones come in at the less expensive, which would be number 1. Number 2 is the most expensive, and number 3 falls right in the middle as far as expense goes. But you notice at the bottom where it says total, we get the total scores, and we find that vendor number 3 actually ended up being the most cost-effective. So we see we didn't get the exactly the cheapest product, but we did get the most cost-effective product for what we're looking for. On slide 14, this is a great summary slide for you, reminding you to follow all of your local, state, and federal bidding policies. It can be confusing sometimes when you have to blend two different things, like we mentioned earlier, as far as posting in the newspaper along with posting the Form 470. But for the most part, whichever policy is more strict is going to be the one that supersedes the other. One thing that we hadn't mentioned yet has to do with voluntary extensions. And noting that at this point of time, while you're negotiating contracts, if you want voluntary extensions to be available to you, it has to be language included in your contract. And then when it comes time to executing that voluntary extension, you must actually physically do something. If it's to send an email saying, yes, we want to execute one of our voluntary extensions, or signing a different form, you just have to have something that shows you went forth with the effort to execute that voluntary extension. On the flip side, evergreen contracts are not eligible within the E-rate program. An evergreen contract being one that says the service continues on unless you give us a 30-day notice or a 90-day notice. That would be an evergreen contract, and those do not qualify any longer in the E-rate program, not since the early days back in like 1997. Documenting the process, as slide 15 points out, there's so much that you have to document, and using your evaluation matrix, keeping a copy of your RFP and all the communications between you and service providers is vital. The way the E-rate program works is that if you cannot prove that you are compliant, it is assumed that you are not. If you have that assumption against you, you could likely be put in a position to pay back any funds that were at one time provided to you. The current rules state that you must retain all documents for a minimum of 10 years from the last date of service. So if you end up in this bidding process signing a 5-year contract, for that entire bidding process, that contract and the services provided under it, you'd have to keep it for a minimum of 16 years because it's 5 years from the, or 10 years from the last date of service.
Okay, on slide 16, I'm going to go ahead and go over what are the data transmission services that are eligible and internet. So just quickly going through this, this is an example of all the data services that are eligible. Some of them are what they call legacy services, and some of them are more newer technologies. On slide 17, eligible voice services subject to the phase down, which means if you're at an 80% discount currently this year, next year it will be reduced to 60, and then the following year down to 40, and so on. So these are examples: Centrex, wireless telephone services, POTS, and radio. And you can see at the bottom there in the red that the phase down that I was just referring to. Slide 18, these are flash cuts, meaning immediately, no longer eligible as of July 1st, 2015. Paging, directory assistance, texting, and also just a friendly reminder that email, voicemail, and web hosting also fall into this category, that they're no longer available after June 30th, 2015. You can continue on your own cost. You don't without E-rate funding. Slide 19, this is the Category 2 services that are subject to the budget of a 5-year period. So the 2 and 5 has been eliminated for those that have been doing E-rate. This just means that either your library or school has a budget that's based upon the elements on slide 19. And it can be used in 1 year or spread out across the 5-year term. Question we get asked is about this is that what in terms of will I get funding this year or next year? That's really hard to tell, but what the FCC has done, they feel like with the reduction in what's eligible, as well as this cap, so to speak, of $150 per student or $2.30 per square foot, that over the 5-year term, no matter what your discount level is, that you should have access to these funds during some period of that 5 years. So as you can see here on slide 19, it kind of breaks down what your budget would be based upon either square footage or students. Category 2, eligible internal connections. And it's pretty much related to 100% of what a local area network is, the terminology, or the electronics that it takes, as well as or the cabling that it takes to connect up those electronics. So we have WAPs, cabling, caching servers, UPSs, firewalls, and routers. Slide 21, this is the internal connections that are no longer eligible. You can take the time to read through these, but in general, local phone system, VoIP systems that you own or on-premise, as well as servers, are no longer eligible. You can get VoIP services or phone services like we talked about at the prior slide during that phase-down period. Slide 22, manage internal broadband services, Wi-Fi. This is a terminology that the FCC uses. They call it manage internal broadband. Basically, they're trying to emphasize a 21st century classroom environment at schools, and also the same thing, a 21st century environment for libraries. And a big push, you can tell, for those that are technical in their role, that the previous two slides ago, that all the components needed to make a robust Wi-Fi network on a local campus, either a library or a school, is what is eligible. So in this particular slide 22, they look at it instead of it being a one-time purchase, that you could do it as a service, kind of like an internet cafe on your campus where a vendor would come in, provide it as a service. They would own the equipment, they would manage it and maintain it. I haven't seen this too much of an offering out on the West Coast, but some colleagues of mine in the South, this is a service that some vendors have been providing for a number of years. Even if it's this managed broadband or a one-time purchase, it's still, the budget for this applies to the same rules that I talked about earlier. You have a 5-year period to use your particular budget based upon either square footage for libraries or student count for schools. And slide 23 just goes into a little bit more details on the limitation of the managed internal broadband services. And then slide 24, this is that basic maintenance category that's been in place for E-rate for quite some time from the beginning of the program. So it's, again, it's your category 2 budget, that basic maintenance falls underneath that, as well as it can be support for eligible internal connections such as repair and upkeep of hardware, basic tech support and configuration. Specifically, if you have a switch, PoE switch, normal switch, or wireless access that needs to be maintained, you could ask for a quote to do it in one of two ways. A time and materials, where you maybe ask for a specific time number of hours per year, or just a flat basic maintenance that could cover that. So support for basic maintenance is limited to acts performed under the contract, work performed. On slide 25, here's some elements that you can go through that are not covered under basic maintenance. Maintain ineligible equipment such as servers, that wouldn't be part of basic maintenance anymore. On-site tech support, unbundled warranties, network management services, including the 24-hour network monitoring. So just a reminder on slide 26 is some miscellaneous charges that are eligible: taxes, leases, shipping, training, and installation. Installation may be provided by a third party. Just a clarification in that last sub-bullet point, there's been some challenges in the past where the program has had under category 2 that when you bought the one-time hardware, the same vendor that provided that quote and that you awarded it to and that you're purchasing the hardware also had to do the installation. Now they've clarified that that is not required, that you could buy the hardware from a vendor A and have vendor B actually do the installation for you.